Hello and welcome to The World Can Be Better. I'm Toby Tremlett and I'm co-hosting with Francis Lorenz. Hello, Francis.
Hello.
In this episode, we're speaking to researcher Fin Moorhouse. Fin is currently working as a research fellow at Forethought, an organization that researches how we might thrive under extremely fast AI progress. As part of his work, he also hosts the Forethought podcast, Forecast, where you can hear more about the ideas we'll discuss today. Previously, he co-hosted the Hear This Idea podcast, worked at Longview Philanthropy and the Future of Humanity Institute, and much more. You can find out Fin's whole professional history, along with just about everything he's read and listened to, via his very handsomely designed website, linked in the show notes. Today, we'll be talking to Fin mostly about three things. The Better Futures series, where he argues, along with Will MacAskill, that it may be as good or better to work on increasing the value of the future than increasing the odds that we survive. We'll also discuss the intelligence explosion, the idea that rapidly improving AI could accelerate technological and social progress. And finally, we're going to talk about an essay that Fin wrote recently, which argues for a non-realist view of consciousness. So, first, Fin, I just want to ask you, how did you get here? What inspired you to research these topics?
Yeah, crikey. First of all, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Let's see. So, I at least like to believe that there was some element of, as I'm sure you've talked about, trying to step back and think about what look like some of the biggest problems in the world, what could be quite important to kind of contribute my time to, trying to care a little bit about that, which kind of led me here. And so, spent some time in grant making and spent some time in research before that. To be honest, what also goes through my head is that that's not the whole picture. I kind of feel like there's also a pretty serious amount of just FOMO. These are just such big, interesting questions. It would be so kind of crazy to miss out on being part of thinking about them if I have the opportunity to, which I am fortunate enough to have. And then just some sense of these questions, as well as I think being quite important, are just so interesting to think about and work on. It's why not?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, I think it makes sense to have a bit of both. Yeah, but when have you last asked yourself the Hamming question? What is the most important question in your field? And are you working on it?
Great question.
Sorry, this was not in the plan. I just
no, great,
because I feel like it's a plausible yes, but yeah,
and I'm long overdue a serious thing about the Hamming question. I maybe we'll find out as we talk more. There are certainly things on my mind which seem why maybe I should be working on this. Why is no one working on it? I suppose something that comes up in the context of, that my colleagues might kind of talk about is, it's not obvious what the questions are. Have we even kind of posed the questions in the right way? Do we need to go and kind of actually uncover new questions, which complicates that Hamming question?
Yeah, that's true. But then I guess part of the work you're doing is posing the questions. And that might be the most important question in the field.
If you want to get meta with it, maybe. Maybe that's right.
The first thing that I wanted to talk about is this series, the Better Futures series. So overall, I take this as arguing that, we'd normally, so for a while, kind of long-termists have thought about reducing the chances of human extinction as just about the best or most robustly good thing that we could do. The Better Futures series makes the argument partially through some quite simple maths that you could actually, in a lot of worlds, increasing the value of the future where we do survive is much more valuable or as valuable as reducing the chances of extinction. Yeah, can you make the basic case for that? Because I think it might sound like a little bit weird to the listener if they haven't heard it before.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe a place to start is just to think about what you should prioritize doing in your own life to make your life go well. So, hopefully, touch wood, we all have like long and happy lives ahead of us. And there are things that we can do now to try to make our lives go even better, right? So maybe things that make us healthier over the course of our lives, or maybe, making friends so that we have like friends for life, hopefully. And then there are other things we can do to make it less likely that we get into some horrible accident and just don't live very long. And obviously we should be doing both of these things as long as we have kind of easy opportunities to do both. But it's kind of pretty clear that you don't want to be obsessively focusing on how do I just not die this year, right? At the expense of making your life go better, assuming that you do survive. Sometimes that might be because there are trade-offs, right? So if you totally obsess about being safe at every opportunity, that might make life a bit miserable. But I'm not really even talking about that. I'm mostly just saying you have finite like time, attention, money. You probably just going to want to split, across being safe and also just having a kind of good life. Now, okay, so I'm back after a technical issue, new camera. So yeah, I was talking about what you might prioritize in your own life, and then you could think about humanity writ large as facing a similar kind of question, which is what's most important to prioritize and to care about for the sake of the future of humanity, right? Not just people alive today, but just future people too. And one thing that is certainly extremely important and hugely overlooked by the world is making the world safer in a bunch of ways, right? So the point of this piece that we wrote is not to argue against the importance of safety, although those arguments have been made elsewhere. But often the arguments for caring about safety, what gets called existential safety, they often kind of appeal to the stakes involved, where if humanity were to fall off the rails or encounter some kind of catastrophe, that is not just a tragedy for people alive today, but it's a tragedy because it kind of squanders this enormous potential for all of humanity over the future, right? Now that is, I think, a reasonably good argument and an underappreciated one. But the point to make here is that it doesn't only apply to interventions to make the world safer. The fact that the stakes could be extremely high and that humanity's future could be extremely long and potentially very valuable, that's also an argument that if there's a way to make that future even a bit better on average, assuming that we do survive, that would also be huge. That would be hugely valuable. And so there's not like like a silver bullet argument that can just get you for free without going and actually investigating concrete facts in the world. A conclusion that says existential safety is the overwhelmingly important thing, or something else is. You can kind of come up with some toy model for this, so you can imagine, comparing different interventions. But that, I'll kind of not go into that for now unless you want me to. Mostly the point is, if we abide that the future could be enormously valuable, that doesn't necessarily privilege only making the world safer now so that we guarantee that we get that future. That also means that it's hugely important to think about ways, if there are any, to, assuming we survive, get a future that is actually great, rather than putting all of our chips in the survival basket and then getting a future that's kind of mediocre.
Nice. Yeah, one kind of like intuition against this that came up when you gave that example of the of the kind of human life is, that there is something about the idea of not prioritizing extinction. I know that, this is kind of under this framing, you're still relatively prioritizing extinction way more than almost anyone in the world does, or avoiding extinction. But it still is saying that there is this thing that could be much more important than avoiding extinction. And yeah, if I found out that, I had a 20% chance that I was going to die next year, which I could avoid by seeking out my killer beforehand. I've got some clues that could lead me to my killer. Or I could continue with my law degree, which I know is going to increase the value of the rest of my life by quite a lot. And I'm not going to get another chance to do my scholarship. So I'm not going to have another chance to do my law degree. Should I just hope that my killer finds another Toby Tremlett? It's a name-based thing. Should I just hope that my killer finds another one? Or should I go and seek them out, but accept that my life's going to get a lot worse?
Yeah. Sounds like you're pretty screwed in that scenario, unfortunately.
It's a real scenario.
Yeah, this is real. This is a real question that I'm facing right now.
Not a joke.
Please help.
We really need the answer. Yeah, please.
If we can talk about that there. Yeah, I think that's just a great point. So one thing to say is, if you thought that the odds of something like human extinction or something comparably bad really were very high, so 20+%, then I think it is kind of reasonable to say, look, among people who want to just contribute to making the future better in this kind of very zoomed out way, probably most people and most resources and attention should go on this kind of fact that the world is in kind of great peril. So it depends on the numbers in that sense. I will say though, there's a kind of awkward blurriness for me about what exactly counts as an existential catastrophe and what counts as just making the future better or less mediocre. And I actually think that a lot of these worries in the context of AI that come up, that are framed in terms of existential catastrophe, it's unclear in those cases. Should we be treating them as this kind of sharp, permanent, and complete loss of value, akin to a person dying or humanity not surviving? Or should we treat them more like we still get a future, something happens, but it's just much less than what we might have hoped for? And in some way, I don't think it really, this is just a definitional question, so it doesn't actually matter. But I think at least I find it useful to think about at least some of these kind of scenarios more in terms of just, look, we're going to get a future. It's not like the world is going to just explode. At least I hope. And so, it just kind of invites a different way of thinking. And then a final thing to say is, I guess the analogy with a person's life can get confusing, because part of what we are kind of arguing a bit later in this series is that the difference in some way between a kind of mediocre future and a great future could be really enormous. So I don't know what an example might be in a person's life. Probably involves some kind of quite contrived situation where you have a very kind of risky year, but then there's also some enormous opportunity, and you want to kind of do your best on both fronts rather than only going for one.
Maybe you're guaranteed to become a Supreme Court justice.
And then, so hang on.
If you go through law school, if you don't get murdered,
Yeah.
and they just kill another person with your name, which could happen.
This could be the new drowning child, I think.
The
Again, it's
LinkedIn
not a
murderer
joke.
or something. They just
Yeah.
Yeah, this is compelling.
Which actually, Finn, I found it quite hard to find your LinkedIn, so you're going to be quite safe from
Really?
this guy.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Might
you,
not be. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, no, but I get what you mean. I think it is like is drastically different. Because we're talking about like I mean maybe it'd be a good idea to get into some of the examples of the kind of like futures that we're talking about here. Because yeah, it is very different to it. It does lose the analogies to a human life for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think first actually, I just this question of like extinction and existential risk. People often use the terms interchangeably, but they are very different things. So yeah, I mean, it might be like, would you mind like explaining a couple of those examples of like things that are existential risks that aren't human extinction?
Yeah, for sure. So this term existential risk, I don't think they first coined it, but I think is kind of associated with Nick Bostrom and Toby Ord. And, you know, I'm not like quoting or anything, but roughly speaking, Toby Ord's kind of notion of existential risk is the risk that humanity writ large, in a somewhat kind of sudden one-off way, drastically curtails its long-run potential. And so human extinction would be an example of an existential catastrophe, because humanity doesn't have much potential left if it's become extinct, right? But there are some things which could count as existential catastrophes, which wouldn't count as human extinction. So one somewhat dark example would be, suppose somehow a kind of totalitarian dictator takes control of the world, and maybe using kind of future technologies is able to basically just lock in their values and their control over the world just indefinitely, kind of like 1984 scenario. That's not extinction. There's plenty of people walking around, but that's a future which is just obviously so much worse than it could have been, and so it would count. That kind of moment where the dictator takes control, that might count as an existential catastrophe. And so existential risk, in this sense, is kind of bundling together lots of events that would curtail humanity's potential, and not all of them have to involve extinction, although people normally think about just extinction.
Yeah, and it also means that there are cases in which humans go extinct and it isn't an existential risk. If like intelligent life could re-evolve and you could have like a corvid planet that goes to the stars, a galaxy full of ravens, that would not be an existential risk as long as they like share our values to a certain degree or something.
Yeah.
So that's why this whole category starts to get like really messed up when you like look into it.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a rabbit hole on its own. It is an interesting question. Like, do you just think it's true by definition that if humanity went extinct, that would curtail our potential? Or do you think that we could get, in some way, a great future, even though it doesn't involve humanity today? So maybe some kind of, like you say, species re-evolves. I think that's actually just an interesting question that depends on your values, but it's a great point.
I have a question that could potentially derail us. But nonetheless, I think I've often heard people saying like it's not obviously intuitive to them why they need to care if anything exists in the world. So they're like I would prefer humanity to exist, but it's not obvious to them that if humans painlessly poofed out of existence, this would be bad, because they're like experientially no one's there to, experience the loss of the humans. Yeah, do you have like thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think it's not a crazy view. Often these get described as person-affecting views of population ethics. So the thought is that it's important to make people happy. It's not necessarily important to make happy people, because what matters is taking actual people and making them better off. And I think it's like an intuition that makes sense that I kind of share in some way. But here are some thoughts to make it seem less obvious. One is, imagine how bad it would be to for just like some group of people to not exist in the future. I think that's kind of straightforwardly bad. The rest of the world would kind of miss out on them. Like, let's say just like an entire country just kind of vanishes. So
Which one,
bad.
Finn?
I'm not going to commit to that.
Shoot.
I know your tricks. So you might think it'd be bad because those people don't get to enjoy their lives. It'll also be bad because the rest of the world misses out. And then you might also think, well, it's strictly worse if more people don't get to exist, right up until the point where no one exists. I think this is not like very philosophically sophisticated, but another point to make is just consider your loved ones who are enjoying happy lives, or like I guess if you're in this position, like imagine if you have children, imagine your children, and presumably you think that if you have children, part of the reason that you kind of care about them is they make you happy, right? But part of the reason you care about them, and you maybe even cared about having kids in the first place, is more intrinsically to do with them, like their own experiences. Like, it's just a good thing that they get to exist and like experience this world, right? And you might think that kind of just generalizes that there's lots of amazing stuff to discover and like lots of experiences and kind of joy to apprehend, and it doesn't matter. Like, why kind of restrict that to people who currently exist? Seems at least somewhat valuable for anyone to get to experience those things, including future people. And then one more thing I'll say is there's this kind of nice thought experiment from the philosopher Derek Parfit where he says to imagine burying a piece of glass under the ground, and you imagine that the next week someone's kind of running along the path and they step on the glass and it hurts them. And that's bad. But now imagine that the glass stays there for 100 years, and in 100 years' time, someone runs along that same path and hurts them. That person didn't exist when you buried the glass. It still seems like you should care about not burying the glass if it were to hurt future people. And that might generalize to, look, seems like we should care about future people. Making sure that they have good lives, maybe even making sure that they kind of get to experience life at all.
This is actually really directly relevant to me because I just cut my foot open on the remains of a Victorian gasworks like a few days ago. So yeah, and that was bad. Not too bad,
Yeah.
but like,
Okay, I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah.
We've largely
It's okay, but I
like-
do think that they probably did something wrong by leaving that there.
Yeah. And I was going to say, Finn, we've largely asked you here because Toby just has a lot of personal issues he needs to work through. And we just need your take on all of them. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing your like personal issues that relate to AGI and consciousness, but
Oh, that's Francis's section, so those will be
Okay.
Francis's personal issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
don't
I
worry
have
about
problems too. It's not
Yeah,
all
yeah.
about Toby. Yeah, but I do like those intuitions. Like, I think that is a good emotional pump for me of being like, I'm happy I exist. So theoretically, the future people could be, and yeah.
Yeah, I about future people, I did. Yeah, so like a key part of this case that we haven't explored as much yet, is, in order for this to matter at all, there has to be something that you can do about it, right? Like, so, what are personally, what are your favorite proposals that you think are most promising for something we could do that could influence the future, specifically in this like flourishing camp, like aiming for flourishing in the future, getting closer to like the best versions of possible worlds, rather than reducing the odds of extinction?
Yeah, great question. And to be honest, I do think it's the case that reducing the likelihood of obvious disasters just currently does feel way more tractable to me. And that's kind of a point in favor of working on that stuff, right? It's unfortunately like quite concrete what it might involve to set off some like very dangerous pandemic or whatever, right? And there's also just like very concrete things you can do to make it less likely. That's, for the most part, does not feel like that's the case for how do we kind of take an okay future and make it amazing. So necessarily, I think the things you got to say here are like quite abstract. I think that's fine. I think that's just because people have thought about this stuff less. Probably the interventions to kind of work on now do look a bit more abstract, a bit more like institutional, and even doing more research and stuff. But to throw out some things that could potentially be important. One is that it seems like the AI systems that we are building and we will build in the future in a kind of even more powerful way. One thing that matters about them is how they kind of choose to behave in the world. Over and above just do they refuse to do like extremely reckless things. And I think there are questions about, do they just try to kind of extract value in this very narrow sense, or in this kind of uncooperative sense? Or are there slightly more like noble things that we can aspire to the way that these AI systems behave? And a nice framing for this is, imagine you're just like writing a constitution for an AI system. I mean, like Anthropic literally have this kind of constitution for Claude, but I'm not just talking about Claude, I'm talking about any of them. Should they be like cooperative with one another or with humans? Should they be trying to kind of encourage certain kinds of deliberation or reflection on the part of humans, even if they're, that's not like kind of immediately obviously valuable? Should they, in some sense, be kind of trying to kind of have some conscience of their own? I think these are not obvious questions at all, but you can imagine that like part of how the future goes depends on how we answer them. Other things are, I think there are questions around whether the future is a place where there's lots of opportunities for trade and collaboration and cooperation between lots of actors with lots of different views, or whether it is basically determined by quite a small number of extremely powerful actors for a very long time. So that second example, it's kind of not clear that it would count as an existential catastrophe, but it does seem worse. And then a final thing I'd say, which is like on the more spicy end, but it seems possible to me that, literal biological humans won't be the only things that matter. Presumably animals matter to some extent, right? But even in the future, it could be that some of these AI systems themselves warrant a certain kind of moral respect, let's say. And there's a question about, the decisions we make now, does it kind of set up for a world where it's possible to like, for lots of these different systems to kind of cohabit and treat each other with respect and enjoy certain kinds of rights? Or is it just a world where it's like, basically anything that's not humans is just like a tool for the humans? And that would actually seem potentially quite bad, despite like not being intuitively bad right now. And like certainly I think it's not important like today. I don't think the AI systems are like at the level of what I'm talking about, but increasingly could be a kind of an issue that could go either way.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think those are all, because they're all issues that could go either way. It does. I guess the next step is obviously more research. But the problem in general with like, right. Like the problem in general with a lot of kind of long-termist suggestions that aren't just reduce the risk of extinction is that you start running into these problems like, are we even roughly right about what matters or something? That like we just don't know. We don't know if we are. And after a long period, we might, figure out that we were completely wrong and we've locked ourselves into the wrong path. I think that you can't actually get around that by focusing on extinction because, like, there are worldviews under which extinction is better, including perhaps the enlightened worldview of the future corvid species that could exist on this planet, the future ravens who would live amongst the galaxy. Yeah. That, perhaps they'd be living better lives than us. Perhaps they'd be wiser. Like how do you approach this this problem, this kind of like cluelessness? There's just like so many considerations that you might not be thinking of. And
Yeah. That's a pretty rough question to answer. Great question.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Why are you
here's
stopping the
thing.
ravens? Sorry,
Right,
continue.
right. I think that it's often possible to, in some way, shut down these lines of thinking with worries about cluelessness. And in some ways, I think these are real worries that don't have like amazing answers. But one thing to notice is that worries around cluelessness kind of infect like so many things. And so if you just prevent yourself from doing anything before you've like really made sure that you're confident, read cluelessness, it's going to be hard to do anything. And so there's some feeling of we kind of need to build the like plane as it's flying or whatever. I don't even know if I can supply a really sophisticated philosophical reason for this, but it just seems like acting on common sense is not a bad place to start. And for example, if the world were like autocratic forever, and like a surveillance state, I can come up with reasons why that might not necessarily be bad, because the autocrat could have great values or whatever. But I'm currently pretty happy just to use common sense to be like, yep, seems worse than the alternative. Let's kind of act on that assumption. And then one other thing I'll say, I might not do a good job articulating this, but there's some sense for me that we have little pockets of cluefulness, where we're like, for example, seems like torturing animals is like pretty bad. Probably that, we shouldn't do that much in the future. There are all these questions about like, if you cut out, meat from your diet, that could have these like knock-on effects that cause there to be more like small animals in the fields that then have worse lives. And I think, again, those are like not silly in many ways. But there's also a sense that we do have a way to stop eating animals, which is just everyone individually stops eating them. And even if individually you have these hard to predict effects, there's some sense of that, look, that you're on a path towards a better world once everyone else kind of gets to that same place. So once all these other things fall into place. So there's some kind of like incrementalism there, which I think helps a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what you're pointing to is that we can there are some areas where we're pretty confident about our values, even if we don't know like exactly what the effects of them when we apply them to the world is going to be. And like you can reduce your empirical uncertainty on what happens when you take actions in the world. Like there are often other considerations that reverse the sign of your action or whatever, but it's not always. Like you can reduce that uncertainty, and we can actually work on this problem if we're like certain about our values. And in some cases, like not torturing animals, we're pretty close to certain. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think this is more or less wrapped up like what I wanted to discuss on better futures. And yeah, no, a key part of like the next like decade or so, or even less, that we also want to discuss is this idea of the intelligence explosion. And yeah, I think Frances has some questions about this.
Yeah, and I think we've actually kind of gone into it nicely. My extremely rough summary of your piece on the intelligence explosion is basically you and your co-author, Will MacAskill, make the case that AI might one day become very intelligent, like way more intelligent than humans. And then basically you say that some people, or there is this common view that this will be like a super pivotal moment in the trajectory of humanity, and it will basically go either extremely well and this like super intelligent AI will like fix everything, or it'll go like extremely poorly and the super intelligent AI will like ruin everything and we won't be able to stop it. And then you kind of make the argument that it's like maybe not so black and white, and there are like a host of benefits we could expect to see and a host of challenges we could expect to see, and like kind of a slightly more optimistic view of like there are things that we could probably do today to try to like increase the likelihood of benefits and like decrease the likelihood of like some of these challenges. Does that feel correct And if so, could you sort of okay, could you just like describe maybe a bit more like what the intelligence explosion is? Um, yeah, actually, that is what I'd like you to do. Yeah.
Great. Yes, I can do that. I guess despite it being in the title of this piece, I don't feel like we have in mind some really sharp definition of intelligence explosion. I think it's more vibes based, and the idea is just this thought that at some point in the future, maybe near future, we might get this real just huge influx of very capable, intelligent beings that are not human and that are AIs. That's pretty much it. And then the question is, like, will that happen? And if so, what might kind of come next? So I can try to say some things about that, if that'd be good.
Yeah, I would like. Yeah, there's two. So I know some people are skeptical of the general case that AI will ever be super intelligent. And given that we are trying to be a little more introductory, I think it's like maybe worth making a quick case for why you suspect this.
Yeah, for sure. I certainly don't think it's absolutely guaranteed because nothing is. I have come around to thinking that it is pretty likely looking. What to say here? So, I mean, one question is there anything about human intelligence or what we're capable of as humans that just couldn't, in theory, be performed by some kind of machine? This is like a much discussed question. So there are certainly lots of things that we can do that no machine can do, but I'm not aware of any arguments that no machine could do things that we can do in principle. It seems like, ultimately we just have these kind of squishy brains that are like doing lots of there's lots of electrical charges moving around. It seems like in principle we could try to figure out what those patterns are and kind of build them ourselves. So maybe more of the skepticism is on, just in practice, we're not going to do that. It seems a bit like sci-fi. One reason to say that, which is totally legitimate, is even the very best AIs right now, they do lots of really dumb things. I think the point to make here is that is totally compatible with the AIs making fewer and fewer dumb mistakes and doing more and more very impressive things as time goes by. Super happy to go into technical details, but I think the basic case is just to notice the trend rather than to think how good the AIs are right now. And the trend has been, in some way, it's kind of easy to forget because we're so used to acclimatizing, but just how unbelievably fast and sustained it has been. 10 years ago, the kind of current paradigm of AIs they're built on now basically wasn't a thing. I'd say, about 4 years ago, the idea of kind of chat assistants, AIs, no one was really taking seriously. It was a kind of research curiosity. And now, like I said, the current AI systems are still limited, but they are doing things that experts in the field predicted that AIs wouldn't be able to do for many decades or even centuries. And then furthermore, the kind of drivers of that progress, they're like embarrassingly simple in some way. The AI companies are basically piling on more compute in the form of data centers with more energy. They're pouring in more training data. They're making a few adjustments in the algorithms to train the models. And they're scaling up the size of the models themselves and the size of the training runs. But none of these things seem like they need to run out very soon. It just seems like that can keep going. Doesn't seem like it's going to kind of necessarily fall off or must fall off. It's a possibility, but it's also a possibility that it just keeps going. I can say more about the details about that. The basic point is just they're getting better really fast. And the drivers of why they're getting better just seem like they could keep going for quite a while.
One thing that I wanted to raise as a point of skepticism was, and I am very, expecting that this will like age very quickly and be very wrong, as with most like skepticism about AI capabilities. But the thing that to me, I guess for a couple of years has like felt like the thing that is missing between like the AI we have today and the kind of intelligence explosion, loads and loads of researchers that can go and autonomously work on problems, is that AI at the moment needs a human to like constantly tell it what to do and constantly tell it off for doing stuff wrong and like basically kind of like scaffold it themselves. And that's partially because like the way that they think is so text-based, and they only really have the kind of last sentence that they've written, and it's just like you can see, I don't know, I was just watching I was asking Claude to do something today and just watching how it was thinking about stuff, and it gets so lost in the source of its own thinking. And if you leave like an AI agent to like try and do something, if it's the longer it spends on it, like the more insane a result you're going to get, or sort of like you're just going to get completely lost. And it feels like there's just something about like agency, but the ability to be a kind of unified agent that could be like a really simple fix, but we haven't found the simple fix yet. And I guess to me, that's like how I could imagine this going is like, we realize we need another piece of technology to enable the like agency aspect of LLMs. And otherwise you just have something that spits out a lot of text that can get a lot of things done, but constantly needs a human to supply the like agent part. But yeah, I mean, again, probably this is going to be wrong in like a week, but yeah. What do you think? Do you like find that compelling, or yeah?
I kind of wonder if it's already wrong. Maybe I'm not like interpreting what you're saying in quite the right way, but it seems like the models are much better than they were a year ago at carrying out long run tasks, right? So, at some point the kind of only game in town was you like type your question to the AI and then it gives you like a few paragraphs of text back, and then nothing happens until you type the next question. Let me put my phone on silent, by the way.
Popular.
It's my mum. That's a joke. So that has changed.
Yeah.
So there are now, mostly in the context of coding and software engineering, it's the case you tell your AI, hey, go and make this thing for me. And then it won't just do something and then stop. It'll kind of chain together actions. So it'll say, okay, I'm going to search the web for instructions, and then I'm going to, make this file, and then I'm going to test it. Now, yeah, about a year ago, that was kind of good enough to make you like a bad website, and it'd always have something wrong with it. Now it is, I'm kind of constantly quite impressed by what it's able to do on its own. Beyond just like anecdotes, you might have seen this graph from Meta, the notorious Meta graph. So I guess, for like listeners who haven't seen it, well, you probably have at this point, the thing they're measuring is for a given model. What is the most kind of impressive task that it can do in terms of how long it would take a human to do that task? So not necessarily how long does it take the AI. And the answer now is many, many hours, basically. Hey, there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Is this going to come up on the video?
Yeah, I think so.
It's like a multimedia podcast. That's awesome.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't even need a producer.
Its kind.
Yeah.
Well, my job here is that you can read the.
Yeah. Well, there's an audio version as
Squinting.
well, Finn. So yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
I guess for the audio listeners, the thing to note about this graph is that although it looks like a straight line, the y-axis here is logarithmic. It's a ratio scale. And so it means that the kind of human time equivalent is increasing by the same roughly the same factor every year rather than the same amount. And so if you extrapolate, the next few years, assuming the trend holds, and actually in some way recent models are kind of above trend, then we're not just talking about, another like 10 to 20 hours to 30 hours. It's more like, maybe hours to days and maybe days to weeks, at least in the software domain. There are lots of caveats here. So one is that these are tasks that the AIs are really intensely trained on, where it's possible to kind of find and generate training data or sources of reward. There are lots of other human skills where it's much more expensive or much harder to kind of collect the data in order to train the models to, go and act like agents in the world. Because fundamentally that's how they are doing this, is they're just being taught to go and attempt to be taking actions like agents, and then they mess up over and over again, and then there's some way that you can tell them when they've messed up. And it's easy to kind of tell the models when they've messed up, when they're like being told to, code up a program that has a specified output, and it's much harder to do that in lots of other kind of human domains. So that might be another reason for skepticism, but at least in this domain, it's like pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is very reasonable. I just want to say for the people who can't see this as well, when Finn's talking about the logarithmic scale, like you can see on this graph that in like 2025, there were things, the state of the art, say when like O1 from OpenAI was out, that could do somewhere between, I think this is just less than an hour. That could be half an hour. I'm not sure with this graph, but call it an hour. It could do an hour-long task. And now we're looking at things that can do. Claude Opus 4.6 is doing somewhere close to 16-hour-long tasks. So this is like a massive increase over the course of a year. So yeah, I mean, I think I am kind of chatting out my ass, really. So thank you, Finn.
Have you used Claude Code or Codex?
I've used Cowork and stuff. Code. I have used it for something, but it just like took me so long.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess in terms
And
of,
it is good. Yeah.
it's definitely like the most recent like holy shit moment for me in some senses.
Yeah.
Being like, it won't be able to do this, but I might as well like see what it does, and then it just kind of does it.
Yeah. I think thinking back in time is the thing that made me update the most over the course of your answer, was just thinking about how it was last year or something. Like remembering when O1 was the state of the art or something. I was just like, oh yeah, that was way worse. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the thing to say here, actually, since we're looking at this graph, is
Just put it away.
there is a reason why the AI companies are investing in coding tasks. Of course, one reason is that there's a market for it, a pretty big market for it, and it's where they're generating most of their revenue. But another reason is, what are the AI companies doing themselves to make the next generation of models that is even better?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing they're doing is they're doing a lot of coding work, right? And slightly more broadly speaking, they're doing kind of research and experimentation, building experiments, designing new kind of algorithms and so on. The AI companies, in some cases quite explicitly, are already using their AI models to help with designing the next generation of AI models. And you could imagine, so they're already quite useful, but you can imagine, at least in theory, that they become very useful. At which point that could accelerate the trend upwards even more, if that makes sense, because AIs are meaningfully helping to even further improve the next generation of AIs, which are then even better at coming up with ideas for how to improve AI systems. Now, I don't think that this is guaranteed at all. One reason is it might become kind of harder to find new ideas for how to improve AI systems, in some sense, at a faster rate than the AI systems themselves are getting better. But so my colleague Tom Davison and others have worked on this kind of question. Tom's view is that it's maybe somewhat more likely than not that you do see this kind of pretty aggressive acceleration. I think that's another quite underrated factor in why we might expect potentially quite soon this kind of big uplift in what the AIs are capable of doing.
Okay, that's actually really interesting. Maybe one thing to kind of tack on to Toby's point is like, is it possible that one cap is like whatever is captured in text? So is it possible there's something about human intelligence that is learned through non-text based information, and like AI will be capped until the point at which it can be like a robot that walks around and like gathers this information? Or yeah, I don't know.
Sorry to chip in, but I saw a startup today called Shift, which is like it will send people round to your apartment in New York to clean it for free if you allow them to film it. Yeah, from like the GoPro on their head. Because they're collecting data to train AI to do tasks like that. So
I do actually think
Okay.
that's totally crazy, and I also think it is kind of relevant because, for what it's worth,
Yeah.
I do just have this vision of the world in like 5 years from now where a whole lot of people are being paid to just do their jobs like effectively with a GoPro to generate the training data for some of these more, these tasks that require like visual or video information, which is a pretty wild kind of possibility, but it does seem like not crazy unlikely.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I think totally reasonable. The AIs just are worse at tasks which seem to rely more on not just like multimodal data, but also kind of stuff where like as a kid, when you learn it by trial and error of doing stuff in the world, right? So for example, we have robots. They're currently in some sense less impressive than I think the text models are, because they're a bit earlier in training the like robotics models basically, and they are like quite separate models, although they are kind of connected in some ways. My answer there would just be, well, it's a very similar process. Like it's possible to train the models on not just text, and many of the top language models today have these kind of multimodal abilities, so they're also trained on images. So maybe the text-specific models will always kind of lack certain abilities, but when we're talking about AI in general, we're not just talking about LLMs where you type in text and they give you text back. That just happens to be the current paradigm that's like making the most money and that people are most familiar with. There's nothing about AI in general that's limited to text.
I think that's a really useful
could you
point.
make a
Yeah.
smell LM? Sorry.
I think a friend of a friend like worked at a startup that has like a AI like wine taster or something.
Nice. A sommelier.
That's
yeah. Nice. Okay, sorry, that was very derailing, but interesting.
Probably the most important question we've asked. Okay, great. Well, okay, so AI will become intelligent. That's what I took away. It will become it arguably is intelligent and may become super intelligent, or rather generally intelligent. So what will happen to the world?
I guess before I answer that, what you just said, I think is worth picking up on. That it is often maybe like not actually very useful to talk about like, is AI like mega or super intelligent, or because obviously there's like lots of dimensions to this, and intelligence is an attempt to roll it all up into some kind of number, which is, in some sense not telling you a lot. The models today are like obviously just way better than any human at some things. Are like knowing answers to trivia questions, right? They're just like wiping the floor with humanity. And then they're like really bad at some things. And so there's a kind of spikiness is the word that some people use, right? And the claim is not that they have to get better at like literally every single thing that humans can do. Like, it's not like they need to be able to like enjoy the taste of coffee and like be able to fall in love or whatever. It's just, do they have enough things to change the world? Okay, and then question is, what happens if the AIs keep getting better, at least in many respects? So one thing that lots of people talk about, and I think is worth taking seriously, is that increasingly the AIs might be able to substitute for people in their work. That is, especially if you have a job where you're spending most of your time like on a laptop typing things in. You don't necessarily need to have like physical presence to do this, right? You can maybe do it remotely. Well, in theory, you can imagine that if some AI system just understood your job as well as you do, then it could just do it, and it'll do it for much cheaper. Now, does that mean that there will be like massive job loss all of a sudden? No, I think there are questions about, different kinds of complementarities, and I think they get kind of not my wheelhouse. I have thoughts, but one thing I do think will happen, that I'm somewhat more confident in, is that growth could accelerate. And the reason for this is that if you look at these kind of pictures about, or these theories about why is economic growth as fast or slow as it is, in the most hand-wavy sense, the basic kind of story is, well, we have like machines and we have people, and they kind of work together to like produce stuff. And they also use like ideas to kind of become more efficient. Now, ultimately, the amount of people in the world is not going to change anytime soon. And so growth is bottlenecked by the amount of people in the world. If you start getting AI systems that can substitute for people, then you remove that bottleneck. And so growth could potentially accelerate very, very fast. Why is this different from the past? Well, in the past, it's been much harder to fully substitute for people. So, for example, if you just like pile up more hammers, like more tools, you can't replace a person with a hammer. You just like still need someone to use it, even though you can make the person more productive with the hammer. In this case, the idea is that you could fully substitute for people. It might require robotics when we're thinking about like physical manufacturing and stuff like that. And then when you just look at what these economic models say, I mean, they basically break because they don't really have a way of saying any limit on how fast growth could become. So that's one answer to your question. There's like lots of other things I could mention, and I'm happy to like mention more kind of challenges that get raised. But I keep kind of coming back to this answer because it seems a bit like almost a bit underrated, that all bets are off on just how kind of quickly the world changes in this very general sense once humans are the bottleneck to the pace of change in growth, at least as much as they are historically. And then that raises questions about, okay, well, what does that change look like? What does that growth look like? But that's the kind of basic answer I would give.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a ton of sense. That's helpful. And I do think the job loss conversation does get a bit confusing because people kind of skip over the explanation that you just gave. And so it feels very like, people are saying this, I don't know. And then also B, it's just like people are kind of bad at talking about very different worlds than the current world. It's just like something people generally, I think, quite struggle with. And then I guess to get even more complicated, in your like paper specifically, you talk about these like kind of worst case scenarios of like someone bioengineers a pandemic because like AI now makes it very easy to do that, and like these like kind of really bad possible things.
Yeah. Let's see. Maybe this almost goes back to Toby's point about agency. I guess one thing that seems likely is that there's this kind of shift from thinking about AI systems as basically tools where you like, tell them what to do, and then very quickly they're waiting for more of your instructions. Two agents acting in the world and capable of taking actions on your behalf, maybe without checking in on you. That raises a lot of natural worries. I guess one worry you mentioned is lowering the bar in general to just as an individual or a small group, just effectively in your backyard, as it were, making very dangerous things. I think the biological risks are like maybe the scariest. I'm not like a bio expert, but can kind of speak to that a bit. I think at the same time, maybe something that I find useful to be picturing is that obviously right now, AIs are these things like in our computers and on our screens, and they're not like physically embodied. And I do expect that there'll be this kind of lag where most of the crazy stuff is basically happening in some sense kind of on computers, virtually, digitally, in data centers, before it really seems to like be affecting the physical world. Like you look outside, like nothing's really different. You like go to work, and it's kind of the same. But it does seem not crazy to me to imagine that after some amount of lag, and maybe not very much lag, the AIs are enabling new kinds of physical technologies and hardware. So things like drones in military applications that might be autonomous, biological technologies, including synthesis technologies that could have kind of dual use applications. In some way, like more autonomous kinds of manufacturing that can kind of, make more of itself in a very kind of hand wavy sense. So this is a rambly answer, but I think the thing I'm trying to get at is realizing that even though today AI systems are a thing that we have on our phones that like sometimes are useful and sometimes say dumb stuff, I think at some point they kind of cause a cascade of changes that become more real and more like, oh, this actually is affecting like physical things in the world.
Yeah, I actually thought that was really well put. I think that's like a good intuition, like pump, basically.
I think I had one kind of last question, which is just about the project as a whole. That I feel like the intelligence explosion is a specific way of like framing this thing, which we've already kind of heard of for a while, that there'll be like some sort of takeoff where like AI systems get better and better and things could go very well or very badly. And basically I was just interested in why, like I don't know enough about the other framings of this to know how novel this one is. And I was just wondering if this is this kind of a very novel view or particular to forethought? Or is this kind of like a new packaging of ideas that have already been around, but probably in like a more like scattered and diffuse way? Because there's this, and then there's also the idea of the grand challenges at the end, which was like something that's a kind of coinage from forethought to explain the problems we might face during the intelligence explosion. So but that was a lot of context, but the basic question is just, is this an exercise in framing of ideas that kind of already are out there, or is there something new in this paper?
Yeah, I think good question. I would say it's much more on the side of just trying to say things that people have very much already said, but just saying them again because they seem important, and kind of putting them together in a way that made sense for us and seems like a kind of slightly maybe like under-discussed kind of packaging of them. So definitely this is not like some kind of new breakthrough concept that like AI might be a big deal. But I could say a bit about kind of what are the alternative framings that this kind of set of ideas is contrasted with. one view which you might attribute to kind of at least some of the writings of Eliezer Yudkowsky and other kind of people affiliated with Miri and so on, is that the you essentially kind of have this like sudden takeoff where you have like a single AI system and you kind of teach it to self-improve in some way, and then, as it were, kind of in a basement somewhere, suddenly you have this like super intelligent AI. And I do think that that's no longer an especially prevalent view, but I think it's worth saying that doesn't seem very likely, or at least it just would break with like every trend that we're familiar with in a way that's like hard to kind of explain for any other reason. There's a related view that kind of once we get super intelligent AI, it could kind of just like solve all our problems for us. Or otherwise it'll just like, end everything as we know it. And I think the main thing that we're trying to say in this paper is it kind of seems like we could just get something that's neither of those options, where, we could continue to see a lot of progress in AI systems. Maybe it might even accelerate, maybe not. That could kind of lead to these downstream changes that I was alluding to. We could find ourselves in a situation where things are still just looking pretty kind of chaotic and uncertain and high stakes. And even though we have these like extremely smart AI systems, which we can ask for advice in some cases if we want to trust them, that doesn't really get us out of the woods, right? There's still just like regular politics as normal, for example. Still just kind of human uncertainty about what do we even want. Still coordination problems about we have these kind of potential technologies that could be weaponized. Can we like find a way to agree not to use them? And so in some ways the world could, I think, really radically change in ways which seem like basically underappreciated by almost the entire world and seem maybe quite scary. But in other ways, like, life goes on. It's not like that's the end of history and the AIs are now just like calling the shots. And that was part of the, I guess, perspective that we were wanting to impart.
That's great. I think that's really helpful for my understanding it. And I think that is, it is like, obviously the way it's described is this very fast takeoff still relative to, not relative to Yudkowsky's views where the computer in your basement becomes God in like an evening or something. But, even a decade of this really fast progress is scary, but it also is a time when humans can still do things. Humans can still act. They can make this better. So yeah, I think that's exciting. And yeah. And I like intelligence explosion as well. It sounds good.
I'll take that. That's most of what matters.
So yeah, the next section is on this essay that you wrote at the end of last year called "No Ghost in the Machine," and I found this when I was like looking through the stuff that you'd written recently, and I really liked it. I think it was it's the example of a lot of the stuff you've written recently has been like co-authored, and I think this was just like it seemed to be a chance for you to kind of like write in a more essayistic style. And I really enjoyed it. So, I guess my first question is like, what was it that brought this essay about?
Ooh, good question. This phrase, someone is wrong on the internet?
Yeah.
I feel like many people, I imagine, I often get quite motivated by just feeling like I have some kind of disagreement and getting kind of motivated to like write it up and see what people will think about it. And I've just been like nerd sniped by these questions for a while, so I thought I'd expunge it from my system and write it down.
Nice. I'm especially interested in this for kind of the question that we'll probably get to at the end about like, I find a lot of this compelling, I still want to do something about. I still think my ethics is based around suffering a lot of the time. So I just want to, yeah. So to make that make some sense to the audience, because that is going backwards. I've got this quote from you of like the statement of what you're arguing, which is the view that the puzzle of explaining consciousness, properly analysed, is just another research programme for the natural sciences, analogous to uncovering the mechanisms of biological life. There will turn out to be no hard problem, though there is a question of explaining why so many people come to believe there is a hard problem. And just quickly to clarify, the hard problem is the problem of how a physical instrument like the brain can generate experiences like not just experiences that you can sort of like describe in a sentence as, you know, Toby saw the cow or something, but just the experience of seeing the cow, the color of the cow, the smell of the cow, the actual, so more kind of cow related stuff. That's really like the hard problem is how a physical system can generate such a powerful impression of a cow and other similar impressions. And you're arguing that this puzzle, how a physical system can lead to this strong impression, is not actually a puzzle at all, or there's nothing there to explain. Does that sound right? Is that a good understanding of what you are arguing?
Yeah, I think so. Wonder where to start here. So we're saying that there is this kind of notionally hard problem of consciousness, which, as you say, is this problem of explaining why there is something it is like to be you and I and Francis. It's taken to be a hard problem because on some views, just knowing the physical facts, knowing facts about psychology, about neuroscience, about cognitive science, and so on, isn't enough to get you an answer to this further philosophical question of why still should it be the case that there is anything it is like to be me, to taste coffee, to see the color red, and so on. I think that's not a crazy thing to wonder about. I think it's extremely intuitive. So I, totally share these intuitions along with everyone else. That there is something really philosophically tricky here. I also share the intuition that there is a kind of really difficult question about which things are conscious, right? So you like take a thing like a certain animal or like maybe a kind of even an AI system, and you're like, I wonder if this is conscious. If you look at a rock, you're like, I'm pretty sure this is not conscious. You look at your friend, you're like, I'm pretty sure this is conscious. It seems like there are facts of the matter about like where the lights are on or off. And yeah, that naturally invites this question. This is part of, I guess, why I wrote this, about how should we figure out whether AI systems are conscious, at least in the future. And, like what kinds of tests do we need to devise for this? That does seem like a pretty big thing to figure out. But the view that I'm arguing for is in some sense quite frustrating, because it says that these questions might not always have clear answers. And the analogy that you might look at is to biological life. So you think about kind of these like 18th century gentleman scientists who are like speculating about a kind of life force, right? And you can then ask, which things have this life force or not, right? Presumably there's like some answer there because it's like a thing. We now understand life a bit better, and we understand that although we know lots more things about the mechanisms of biological life, the answer to the question, like, is this thing living? Like, is this virus alive? Is this computer simulation of a cell alive? Whatever. It's ultimately, like, not a question where there's always, like, some really clear yes or no answer. Kind of depends what you mean by alive. That's basically what I'm saying seems possible of consciousness too. So when we're asking these questions about animals or AI systems or whatever else, often the answer is going to be, I think, quite messy and frustrating. Rather than there's some fact about the universe that the lights are on or off. Yes, I'll stop talking.
So, yeah, I mean, no, I think that's so this isn't exactly where I was planning to go next, but I think that the very natural thing to say to that, right, is, okay, that's because life is kind of underdefined. And our most intuitive understanding of what life is or something doesn't involve the life force necessarily. Like, this is what the Victorian scientists went to when they tried to describe what the phenomenon of life was. But with consciousness, at least the case that is often made is, like that with the impression of the cow or something. We're talking about, like, when I see the color brown, there is, like, for example, this brownish cardigan that I've got before me right now. There is something that is like to see that color brown that cannot be explained purely in the physical goings on in my brain, or even in just kind of text or something. Like, there is in the sense that it's very hard to put a finger on this exactly, which I'm sure is going to come up in a sec. But like, there is something that I have that somebody who cannot see the color brown, someone who is colorblind, does not have. Right? Even if they can distinguish the same colors from each other, there is something that they are lacking here. So that's kind of like that feels like the fundamental fact here. And that goes for stuff like smell, but also for pain, the experience of being in pain. Crucially, I'm sure this is going to come up later, but that there is like something it is like that if you just went through the motions of it, there's something you'd be lacking. Or if there's someone who went through the motions of being in pain, but they actually felt the experience, it felt like they were being tickled or something. Like, they would be having a different experience than me, even if they reacted exactly the same. How do you respond to this kind of bunch of intuitions? Because I think this is like the natural response from what you call the realist about consciousness.
Yeah. And then I guess, for context, the thing that I was arguing for in this essay is sometimes called, illusionism about consciousness, or more broadly, a kind of like non-realism about consciousness. And I should say, this is not a view that I'm like 100% confident in or anything. I was more just like, seems plausible to me, seems kind of underrated or something. And then everything you say makes sense. I think that the non-realist about consciousness doesn't need to deny that, like, you're not crazy when you say, like, oh, there's something going on, like when I'm, smelling coffee or like seeing the color brown. The difference is more that when you start talking about, there are these kind of private and ineffable and kind of directly apprehended, like, sense data. Sometimes people call them qualia. These kind of things that you have this like immediate relationship with, that you kind of know better than anything else you could know, but you can't really communicate to people. The illusionist is saying that it only seems like you have this relationship with qualia, and there are in fact no qualia. And I think it's useful to compare that to view like a realist flavor of physicalism. So I think you could say, kind of not crazy view, you could say, these things are real. There's these kind of essentially private mental states that are, again, kind of indivisible and ineffable and incommunicable, whatever. But they happen to be identical to brain states or brain functions or computations or whatever else. And so it's in some way like a kind of subtle difference, and in another way, like, it's kind of a crazy view to say, no, I'm not saying that consciousness is physical. I'm saying that phenomenal consciousness, the kind of thing you start talking about where you're like trying to pin down this like essentially private thing, is just not a part of the world. Mm-hmm. And what's really going on is that it just seems like we have these kind of properties. So that's not the same as saying that there is no such thing as consciousness, because that is completely crazy. It's saying that if we build in enough of these kind of properties into what we often people call like phenomenal consciousness or qualia, it's more reasonable to say that we're just mistaken about this being a thing at all, than to say, oh yeah, we're pointing at something, but we often kind of make mistakes about the details. So it's a slightly more radical view than physicalism. It's also not saying, I don't know if you can hear that helicopter. It's a link
Yeah.
to the murderers come from me.
I know. I was just gonna say, get out now, Toby. You're good. You're safe.
Yeah,
Okay,
no.
you're next.
Thank God. I can stay in law school.
Yeah, it's also not saying that we shouldn't care about things like suffering and happiness and other mental states. Although I think it is somewhat more frustrating and confusing to think about what kind of grounds those attitudes.
Yeah, because so that's the biggest thing for me that I find it hard to, because I also, you get a similar argument in like Wittgenstein, and I had a similar like conversation with a Wittgensteinian professor a couple years ago, where it was just kind of like they're all very dismissive wherever anybody talks about like what it's actually like to be in pain or something. They're just like, ha ha ha, these sentences don't make any sense. But then I'm just like, okay, I kind of like, at this point I get this argument. I like that there is like something here, but I still really need to like, it matters to me. The question of like, are shrimp suffering is like really important to me, because I could make massive changes in my life around this. And it really does feel like the thing that I care about is the actual experience of suffering. And if that's like, in some sense, the thing that I mean when I talk about the kind of qualia or the the phenomenal experience of suffering, that feels like the thing I care about. And I don't care about like a being getting its preferences frustrated or whatever if it's not got that suffering. How do you, I could tell you were kind of grappling with that question as well at the end of the essay, like how do you deal with this?
So my main answer is that I also find this really confounding, because I have this kind of combination of views that I find these arguments for kind of non-realism about consciousness very compelling. And I can actually say the arguments at some point if that would be useful.
I was going to say, yeah. Yeah.
But then I also have these intuitions that what I really care about, like more than, or in some more kind of fundamental way than almost anything else I can think of, are these apparently basic facts about suffering and pain and joy and happiness. And it seems like the tension, because the non-realist is saying that at least it's not clear like how basic those facts are. It seems to require some interpretation of the world. My first attitude is that you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. In some sense it would have been like maybe convenient if it just turns out that like written into the universe are facts about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much is each like thing suffering? And there's like one scale that is the most important scale. Maybe it's not so shocking that isn't true.
Yeah.
I don't think that implies that you can't care about suffering. I think it implies that there's just a certain amount of openness and judgment calls that you need to make about what exact conception of suffering do you care about. Maybe no one's going to tell you what the answer is to that. In some sense, I kind of feel like, it kind of was maybe like a bit of a crazy hope to think that the universe is just going to give us the answer, right? Turns out that like pain and pleasure are the fundamentally important things. And moreover, there are these like basic facts about how much pain and pleasure there is and how to bring it about. I'm like, well, we're a bit more kind of out to sea than that. But that's fine. Like, it was a slightly like crazy view to begin with, to hope that both these things would turn out to be true. And the fact that the world is a tiny bit more complicated, I'm like, well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's a wide open sea. No, that's reasonable. No, I really like that response. I do want to make sure that we don't leave the audience without actually having talked about your key argument here. So I took this to be the debunking argument that you made. Is that correct?
And to be clear, it's like very much not my argument. But what's the basic idea? So here's an example. Imagine that someone comes to you and they said, "You'll never believe it. Last night I saw a UFO." like it was kind of had these colors, it looked like this. And then you find out later that there was this weather balloon in the same area that happened to have these like lights attached to it. Now, what you can do is you can explain why your friend thought they saw a UFO and said they saw it without ever appealing to the fact that a UFO was actually there.
Wait, you think they saw the weather balloon?
I'm a weather balloon truther. I'm sorry you have to find out this way. And so
Jeez.
Maybe there's a general kind of pattern here, which is that if you can explain why someone kind of thinks something or says something without or in a way that's basically independent of that thing being true, then you can effectively debunk it. Now, this is different from saying if you can explain something just without ever mentioning the word, right? So someone says they think that they saw a tiger, and you're like, oh, I could explain that just in terms of like neural firings and whatever. That doesn't mean there wasn't a tiger, because the neural firings would have like been about a tiger, right? And so applied to the consciousness case, the idea is, can we explain why people seem to think that there is something kind of that there are these kind of deep facts about consciousness, and that there are these kind of deep questions about which things are conscious, and that there are in some way kind of clear answers to those questions. In other words, can we explain why people think that there is a hard problem of consciousness? I think the answer is, in theory, yes. Right? You can imagine if we have much better neuroscience, a much better understanding of human psychology, we might start to build up a picture of when we introspect, it's kind of, we have these intuitions that this is like a very like private experience that's kind of different from just like physical things or whatever. The question is, can you give an explanation that is independent of this so-called phenomenal consciousness thing? So I actually think this is like not obvious. It's not the kind of thing that you can really definitively argue for without actually going and finding out. But it seems to me like the answer could be yes, that when we look hard enough, we realize that there are these kind of systematic things going on in our brains which make it really seem like, you know, the taste of coffee or the color red is like irreducible to any kind of other process. It's like kind of ineffable. It's kind of essential somehow. It's like a particular kind of, you know, maybe there's an evolutionary story or a neuroscientific story. But you can imagine some explanation which never actually invokes the fact that there is an essential experience of tasting coffee. And in that case, it would seem like it's now possible to debunk claims about phenomenal consciousness in the same way that you just debunk your friend's story about the UFO just by pointing to the weather balloon. So that's the rough argument.
I think, yeah, an uncertainty that I had with that is just how does that case differ from the example you gave with the tiger? So, you know, with the tiger, you can explain it in terms of all the firings or whatever. You can explain it in purely physical terms, but also, yes, there is a tiger there. Yeah, I can kind of see how it does, but yeah, can you just spell out how that is different to this like phenomenal consciousness? Yeah.
So one reason would be that in the tiger example, the kind of story about how you came to say that you saw a tiger depended on the fact that it was a tiger, in the sense that if you kind of changed whether or not you actually were seeing a tiger, so you changed it to like just a cat or a lion, then even though you could still tell that story without ever saying the word tiger, and you're just talking about neural firings, well, the neural firings are going to be different. And so In that sense, the neural firings are kind of about the tiger. And so, yeah, in the consciousness case, the idea would be not just that you don't need to mention the word consciousness to explain why people have these intuitions about it. It would be that the story you can tell about why people have these intuitions about consciousness doesn't depend at all on whether or not you actually are phenomenally conscious. So you could vary whether you're phenomenally conscious. You could kind of turn it off or on, and that wouldn't change the answer. And I do actually think this is kind of, I mean, every view on consciousness is confusing and unintuitive, but there is something really weird about the possibility. Well, put it another way, I guess it seems totally plausible to me that, like, you know, we get good enough neuroscience or whatever, like, you know, presumably the stuff we say is a product of stuff going on in our brains, that we can explain why we say stuff about consciousness without invoking consciousness itself. That would seem to imply that we can kind of turn off our consciousness and turn ourselves into zombies. And that wouldn't affect why we talk about consciousness or whether we talk about it. I mean, this is the famous kind of philosophical zombie example.
Yeah.
And something really weird is going on there, where you think there is this real property that you're directly acquainted with that, like, grounds out, like, almost everything you care about, morally speaking, but it has no influence on the words you are saying right now. It's like,
right.
Why should that change my view? Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I think there are a few. There are so many things I want to ask, but that's because it's such an interesting area. But we have gone a bit over the time that you agreed to, so I do want to just kind of like round us out a little bit. Francis, I believe you have a question about the moon.
Yeah, we were going to do rapid fire, but I'm just going to do one rapid question. Okay. If you could go to the moon for 5,000 pounds this weekend, and it has to be this weekend, and you have to cancel whatever you were planning to do, would you do it?
Do I go back?
Yeah, you come back. You just go for the weekend.
Obviously.
Yeah, it's a weekend trip, yeah.
5,000 pounds.
So I have a theory that this question, well, not exactly this question, and this might be overgeneralizing, but I feel like there's a pretty big gender split on these questions.
Okay.
Like, would you just, like, go to Mars and never come back? I feel like it's a very, like, guy thing to be like, of course I would do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you?
Wrong, but it's occurred to me.
There was this, like, Olivia Rodrigo quote where someone, they asked her, like, what do you ask on a date or something? She's like, I ask, would you go to space? And if they say yes, I, like, stop dating them or something. I don't know. Wait, but Toby is an Earth truther, and he refuses to go to space.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, it's sort of like I could do it if someone, like, really wants to go or something, but, like, I would generally think that £5,000 is kind of expensive for a holiday. The moon's probably going to be pretty boring. You're going to have like 10 minutes of it being like super great, but then I don't know. I just like probably have better stuff to do with my weekend.
I didn't think about the money. That's a good point. Would you do it, Francis?
But I mean, yeah, because I feel like in my heart it would be spiritual for me. Like, I feel like it could potentially cure my mental illness, and I have to take that chance. I don't know. You know,
it's like an opportunity for a, like, no phone weekend. You can kind of detox a bit.
Yeah,
that's
you
true.
come
That's
back.
true.
You can't check emails because there's no Wi-Fi.
That's true.
I was thinking the moon would probably immediately become like a kind of gambling area, though, because it would be like outside of normal laws, and so it would just kind of be like a really lame Las Vegas. Yeah,
we have actually been doing some work on the moon, for what it's worth. I don't know if this is the question, but
you went like you did it like in the field.
Yeah, we went to the moon.
Yeah.
To
For a second, I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, we've been doing a bit of work on the moon.
We've been up there every weekend.
What have you been thinking about?
We didn't go to the moon, but we've been thinking about it. For example, what might it look like post AGI for? Would it make it easier to build like a basically a base on the moon? What does the existing like space law say about what's allowed and what's not allowed? Would there be some kind of race for the moon? Could there be like particular weapons you could build that would be dangerous? Fun stuff.
That's good. Could Toby's murderer kill him on the moon and get away with it?
If Toby's on the moon and the murderer is on Earth,
Well, so I'm probably,
I guess-
the thing is, if I'm on the moon, it's most likely because I became a space lawyer, which means I passed law school, which means I wasn't killed by the LinkedIn murderer. So actually,
Okay.
good.
it's kind of a trick question.
Yeah.
I like that.
Almost got you, Finn, but
Yeah.
I stepped in.
We do actually have a space lawyer on the team,
Really?
Are you serious?
Chase Hamilton.
Sick.
Yeah, he's in training
Wait,
right now,
wait.
so you could chat to him.
Really?
Toby, you have to talk to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Nice.
really great.
Nice. I'll see if I can track down this space lawyer tomorrow.
You're lucky.
Yeah, I think so this is the first time we've co-hosted a podcast, but so we can't say always our final question. But the final question that we might do always is can the world be better?
I need to take a moment to think about that. I think yes. I want to.
Yes?
Yes.
Massive.
the truth.
Okay. Thank you, Finn. It's been a pleasure to have you on. It was also a pleasure just to read some more of your work, and we'll be linking it in the show notes and stuff. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, guys. I thought, great questions. Had a great time.
Yay.
Love what you're doing.